Howdy, welcome to VTS60. I'm your host, Keith, and we are going to continue our conversation about cartoon animation. Last month we spent pretty much the whole time talking about the big, like, tectonic shift difference between what animation had been for about 70 years and then CG, where the concept of shapes versus forms um, or parts. Okay, if you recall, or if you didn't see it, we'll just do a quick little recap. Uh, the big difference with more classic or cartoon animation is it's more about shapes and transition, meaning how you get the in-betweens or the breakdowns, or that motion is more defined by shape changing, whereas CG tends to be more about parts. Um, because our focus is on parts, because it's a very mechanical process for animating. It's not unlike stop motion in a lot of way, where okay, I move the arm, and when we give feedback to one another, we refer to parts. Okay, so okay, well the arm needs to do this, or the shoulders need to do that, or we're always kind of breaking the character down into these sub elements, and when we do that, we sometimes forget that, overall shape in general is very, very important. So we end up focusing on pieces. And it's just a different way of thinking about things. And most CG animators don't think in terms of shape from getting from point A to point B. Um, what I want to do this month is I want to kind of walk us through a real quick setup of how to build this concept without using any special fancy tools or anything, because I think the thinking or the line of thought out there is that this sort of thing really requires special tools or special rigs, or custom plugins or mail scripts to deform characters, and it's not the case at all. It's really just about thinking differently. You can do this with 1999 rigs. Okay, it's just thinking about how you you do animation instead of focusing on parts, or saying, well, I'm going to watch the arc on the hand. Well, that's important, but let's kind of bring that back and look at the whole in general, and think about what shape the hand is creating as it gets from point A to point B. Um, and one of the things if you recall, is I said that a good shape, or like smear frames, are a good example of, like, really condensing the concepts of shapes down into the simplest form, where something starts here and ends up over here, and in a very short amount of time it smears its way across like that. Well, you can kind of create quasi smear frames using a rigid CG rig. It's not that difficult. It's just a matter of thinking about it in a way that allows you to kind of create this sort of, from here to there sort of feel at the same moment. Something that seemed to really connect with a lot of people is the idea that a good smear shape shows you where you were, where you are, and where you will be, all at the same time. Um, you know, for example, again, getting to our little ball here, we're going to start here, we're going to end here, and we want to swoop down. So you can create a shape in motion that can really show, this one drawing right here shows kind of where you were, kind of where you are, and where you will be. Okay, it kind of draws a visual line with just one drawing to kind of give you the sense of how things are going to work. And this is especially true for smeared drawings on limited frame rates, and really pushed cartoon animation. But this concept right here, in CG we've tended to use motion blur to kind of get this for free, but motion blur is a lens effect. It's an artifact of camera lenses not being able to really process things at a high resolution of fidelity for frame rates. You just can't, as it opens, it's trying to, for the time the frame is open, you've got, this object moving quickly across its field of view, so it's going to render or capture it here, 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 and here. So it's really what happens with motion blur is you have a camera lens, is the aperture is open, and what's happening is it's capturing not just a single instant, but a even just a still photograph is capturing a micro section of time. Okay, because an aperture speed is, how fast or how slow this thing opens. So how long is it open for? How long is it, how fast is it open? How long is it open? How fast is it close? Well, of course, the longer that shutter speed is, or the slower the shutter speed is, the bigger block of time that you are telling the camera to record. Well, the bigger block of time, the more things can change. And so that's really what this whole concept is here, is just a smear drawing is kind of like leaving your shutter speed really, really slow and showing in one drawing more than just an instant of time, but you're showing kind of like a smear of time, a selection of time. Even though it's just one image, it's still not capturing like I don't know what's less than a millisecond. I mean, there's like a millionth of a millisecond. How finely do you chop reality down to where you're recording an instant and not a section? Well, it's always measured in duration. So, anyways, that's a kind of esoteric commentary. What we can do is I'm going to walk us through a couple of things: a pose, breakdown, eases, and how we can kind of build this sort of smeary effect with a simple rig. Now, I know that the Moom rig here is one of my favorites to work with. The bendy controls, I can turn those on, and all that's like the deformation controls, I can turn those on. We can definitely get well, if we put him in the right, like the body resolution is mid, you can definitely do a lot of stuff like that, and a lot of people end up relying on stuff like that, and that's cool. But I'm going to avoid using those on this one, just to show you that you don't need them, and they're not really absolutely vital. So I'm going to turn off the deformation controls, and we're just going to do something real simple. Where, in a junky sort of way, I'm just going to pose this character out, and I'm going to try and make the poses fairly extreme, so that they're easy to read, and so that the stuff is simple to work with, and we'll kind of go from there. So you watch as I kind of build my poses really, really simply. It's always good to have balance in your poses, and somebody might say, well, why am I watching Keith build these poses? I mean, well, because I think it's always good to watch somebody build their poses, and especially, I'm a big proponent in having balance in your poses and making sure the stuff works right. So this is going to be a simple, kind of a basic little head turn take sort of thing. And well, we need to make him IK. Here's what I'll do. I'll go ahead and I'll make a camera real quick. Let's see. We'll just make a solo one. Sure. I'll just pop in a camera so I have something to work with here. Yeah, that'll do. Of course, my camera switching script doesn't work so hot right now. There we go. That's what we're after. Doodly doodly doo. I have a little script that helps me kind of pop back and forth, so I don't have a bunch of windows open. I can just stay in this space and just work kind of creatively, right brain sort of way, and it lets me kind of see how things are working to camera view, because that's really important when you're working for stuff that's more for film. Whenever you have a fixed viewpoint, try and work with it as much as you can. My recent work here more at Valve has been it's been about working in games, so you have to make it work from a lot of different angles, but I still try and pick one for me that's kind of like just works. Let's see, just do this relax. That works okay. Not particularly super balanced in the pose, but it's broken up enough. Maybe take this foot and move it back a little bit. Clean up the silhouette some. So this a little bit easier to work with. Maybe put that like so. And I want to grab this and maybe spread them out a little bit. Okay, so lean, nah, twist, nah, I think we're fine. Cone, rah, rah. No. All right, so okay, so I'm just trying to get a basic pose. It isn't great, but it can work. And maybe even raise this foot up a little bit. Nope. Okay, not a great pose, but it'll do. So what I'll do is I'll just key all of that. Then the way I usually like to work is I like to kind of make my two poses and then make my breakdown, and I'll kind of show you how that will work here. So we'll make our second pose. You know, he's looking way over here. Turn that back sort of to 0. Don't like how his head's all stuck out right there. Maybe he grabs his head. Sure, let's have him grab his head. And get his shoulders up a bit. Come over here, grab your head. Grab your head, Moomy. In shock and horror. Just really kind of goofy over the top sort of deal. And maybe change my camera here so that... Alright, and then get him off the roll of his foot. Get this knee over here. Oops. Maybe grab all of these. I'll move them up at the same time. La-di-da-di-da. Let's see, I think this right here needs to... There we go. That's what we're after. So trying just really quickly here, as quick as I can without making it look absolutely terrible. Yeah, maybe something like this. Alright, really cruddy pose, but you kind of get the idea. Alright, so how you switch from here to here and create that, you know, without using any special deformation tools, how do you get that look? So I'll set a key there, I'll just move this over, and then right here is kind of like, you know, your breakdown sort of thing. What you have to do, you can't just come at this and say, okay, I'm going to take whatever the computer gives me and start sticking keys. You have to think ahead of time. Because you know, to work this way, it's really important to understand what it is you want to do before you do it. There's room still for kind of finding your way, but just have a general approach. You know, in this instance, how do I want to get from over here to up here? Even if I can just pick, I want to go over the top or I want to go underneath. Okay, that will give you a start. The other thing is, so that's one decision. The other is I want to go really slow at first, and then I want to cover a lot of distance at the end, or I want to cover, you know, I want to explode over and ease in. You know, neither one is right or wrong. It's just whatever you want to do, or vice versa. So you know, you have some choices here. In this one, what I want to do is go slow fast. Okay, so I'll ease out and then snap up. Okay, and I want my arc to be underneath because I just kind of like the look of it. And if I want to get fancy, maybe I'll do an overshoot and settle back. Okay, but right now I'm going to focus. Since I'm working on my breakdown, I'm going to focus on these two things, and then this I'll worry about later. So now that I have some sense of what I want to do, I can build my breakdown with some sense of intelligence too. Okay, so I want to be underneath. Well, let me just draw the head here, my hips here, and then come over here, and our head's up here, and our hips are over there. So the breakdown, if I get the middle, let's drop the hips, okay? And I wanted to kind of go slow and fast, which means at this halfway point, I want to be more towards this one because it'll take me, if I break this up right now, it's just 3 frames, but let's think about this when I start timing it out. If I'm going to start at 1 and I'm going to end at 10, if this ends up being here at 5, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Okay, so let's start at 1 and 11 and make that 6. That's perfectly halfway. So if this is going to be at 6, if I put this at that halfway point, then it's going to feel even. But if at frame 6, when this eventually ends up being there, I put it back here, it's going to take 1 to 5 to get that far, and then from 7 to 11 to get that far. You'll see it'll go slow, then fast. All right. So just some basic decision making ahead of time helps me know how I want to approach making this breakdown. Probably didn't want to do that, but I did want to undo these so that they're not cluttering things up. And I really want to kind of build a shape that shows me sort of where I've been and where I'm going, sort of deal. Alright, so I'm not really liking that too much. So what I'll do here is I will counter this and kind of collapse him on himself so that he's more balanced. And then kind of lean him back up this way. And with his head, I want to kind of create a sense of some drag here. And maybe just use that just a little bit as well. Alright, so what I'm trying to do is create this sense of where I came from and where I'm going. And this foot could flatten right out. In fact, I could probably just copy that key right there. There, it's frozen. Take and roll that in there. Now the thing about this particular approach is you are going to, when you think in terms of shapes, you don't have to worry about like, well, what's the hand doing? What's the arm doing? Just think in terms of shape. All right, and I think that will help. That will really kind of help figure out how things are going to work for you. Take this one, and I want to take and lock his foot down here so that his feet are kind of flat on the ground. Alright, so the head for my breakdown is here-ish. I'm not convinced it's great, but you kind of get the idea. And the hips are kind of down here. Alright, so if I hide all this business, you can see that the yellow is leaning more towards that first pose, so that's part of the slow fast, or in other ways that's favoring that first pose because the breakdown is more like that one. It's creating that under arc. So even if all I do is I just choose again something, don't just go in there and say, oh, whatever the heck, I'll try and find it. Just give yourself a plan. If you don't like the plan, you have totally free to change it, but just give yourself a plan. Say, okay, I'm going to do slow, fast, under arc. At least gives you something to work with. So we're kind of right here. Still not real happy with the head. Maybe what I'll do is something like this. And I can tuck the head back in because he moves. And because I'm concerned more about shape, I don't have to worry too much about structure. Hey, phone's ringing. The idea here is that you're going to be more about the shape in general of what you're after. You don't have to worry about so much, especially when you're dealing with a single camera perspective. You're really not going to worry too much about, oh gosh, that feels like it's really, you know, you're not going to get in there and go, oh, is he penetrating himself or something? You can kind of get away with a lot more. Um, Now, the one thing I didn't do is I didn't mark out where the hands were because I wanted to kind of track the head and the hips first. Okay, so what I want to do now is take a moment and sort of mark out where my hands are. Um, I guess I'll just do it with the yellow still. And then we'll get up here, and they're both kind of up here, up here. So keeping with that underneath thing, I want to make them both feel like they're coming underneath. Now this is where when you can really use your limbs to fill out the shape, and this is what I mean. We could quite realistically, or quite nicely, create a shape where the limbs are doing a lot of work for us in helping to do that where we were, where we are, where we're going kind of sort of thing. So in this instance, what I want to try and do is create a nice, simple, swoopy shape. Um, and it may or may not work to a certain degree. I mean, a lot of it just depends on how nice the rig plays. Um, and it's not a great pose because he's kind of toting out right here. What I mean by that is he's just kind of, it's not maintaining his volume very well. And this is, one area where you will kind of struggle a little bit. But this could help right here. And this is the experimenting part that I was kind of talking about. Like, yeah, you do have some room to work with, and you can kind of play with some stuff. And this is pretty extreme. I wonder if there's like a bank thing going on here. Yeah, we can kind of do that. All right, so what I'm doing here is I'm trying to create this with a non-high deformation character rig. I'm trying to create a stronger sense of kind of smearing inside of himself by arranging his what we would normally refer to as body parts, but I'm looking at them and I'm kind of considering them to be more shape contributors, if that makes sense. Um, and with doing this, um, you may get some weirdness where this one's kind of popping up there while the other stuff is kind of lagging behind. But what I'm trying to do, okay, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag with the body, but kind of maybe lead with the head. And I'm still trying to find something where I like what the head's doing. Um, yeah, I like that a lot better. It's such a struggle sometimes. Alright, so this breakdown is doing a couple of things. Um, if I turn off all these doohickeys, we'll see that it's not a great flow. I don't like where that arm's coming from, and if I could get away with it, I would actually bring that arm down in, and maybe I can get away with it now that I think about it. Just take his shoulder, wherever that is, and kind of pull it back. Alright, that's a little better. And again, it's the head's hiding it, so I'm not worried about that too much. If you're dealing with cloth sims or something like that, well, that's another story. Then you really do have to think in terms of parts, and it becomes far more like stop motion than traditional, cartoon hand drawn. And you would use the fingers as well. I haven't touched the fingers, but to kind of create this where it's going sort of deal. The finger's going to be down there, and it's going to end up up here, and our shape, I want to kind of create a curve here. I don't want it to be linear, so I'm going to bring this out, but I want to create a nice pleasing swoop up in there. So I'll go ahead and I'll go ahead and use the fingers to do that. Yeah, let's see if I can kind of get away with it. I'll take all these to 0. I may need to do these one at a time, which I never really like how this sort of works, but you can use little things like this where you can really bend the thumb away and within the shape of the hand itself create this curve that I want to create right there. And I may even just leave that up so you can kind of see it. And let's see, take the curl like so, and maybe even stretch out the length a little bit. I mean, I am borrowing a little bit of its capabilities. And take this right there and maybe something like that. And maybe if I took this hand and just bent it a little bit that way, I could get a little bit more out of it. So if I took this and just kind of use the controllers that it gives you to really kind of give yourself something to work with. There we go. And I'm really not concerned so much about what the parts are doing related to each other. It's all about creating the shape that I want to make to kind of get from point A to point B. And so maybe something like that. It's not great, but you kind of get the idea. And maybe even just tuck that thumb up just a little bit. I may have spread that out just a bit much. But what I'm trying to do is create this kind of clean flow that you can read through here, you can read through here. And I would do the same thing here with this fingers, where his fingers are kind of right there. So what I want to do is I want to kind of point the hand back to those. And let's see if I can get his full hand controller thing here. And I'll take all this business and I'll just set it to 0. Let's see. Alright, just quickly sort of rough it in there. And it does have this one length thing in it. Maybe? Does it? No. It's just got this twist. Well, that'll work. So what I'm trying to do here is kind of show the fingers pulling away from that on the way up to where they're going to be up here. Alright, so I'm creating all these, and so I'm working on a level that we talk about a lot in computer graphics is, well, I'm really looking at my arcs. Yes, I am looking at my arcs, but I'm not looking at my arcs in isolation. I'm looking at the arcs of the fingers and the hands and the hips and the head, and I'm looking at the drag and the overlap. Drag is like there's two sides to overlap. Before you can overlap something, you need to drag it, because if you just do something flat and it overlaps, it feels like it's got no weight. In order to have good overlap, you got to drag first and then overlap and settle back. So it's like you need the drag before you can do the overlap. A lot of people don't understand that. I didn't for a long time. So your breakdown really needs to define what that drag's doing. I'm looking at things like silhouette. I'm looking at things like flow lines. I'm looking at things like arcs. I'm looking at things like balance. I'm looking at stuff like drag and all these things, but I'm not looking at them in isolation. I'm looking at them in the context of trying to create a shape that gets us, that kind of connects the A and the B. All right, so in that sense, I'm just trying to really be mindful of what we can do here. And I may take this up a little bit because I'm not real pleased with how this is turning out. But there we go. Now I'm starting to get somewhere. And if I take and kind of drag that back this way. Okay. It's starting to take some shape. And it really is kind of breaking quite a bit, but that's okay. But that's really what this is about, is we want to connect the past and the future and the present all in one thing. And the stronger you can make the breakdown work in understanding this, the better you're going to be when it comes time to start filling in the blanks and doing all these other things. This may be out there a little bit, so maybe what I'll do is I'll bring it up there some. And maybe just bring that up a little bit right there. So what this one breakdown is doing, besides all there's the three things I always say a breakdown needs to do. A breakdown needs to define your arcs. Your breakdown needs to define your drag and so that your overlap can work later, and it needs to define your favoring. Okay, this one breakdown is doing all those things, but beyond that, it's got all of these things are serving in the terms of shape. All right, because the overall goal of this breakdown is to create a connection, build a bridge from the previous pose to the next pose, all within this one shape as much as we can do it. And that's really kind of the key to this very stylized, rather over-the-top kind of cartoon animation, is really take these breakdowns and push them, really make them do a lot for you that you're not used to seeing done in computer animation. A lot of times there's a lot of what I call micro focus of these things, like I said, the arcs and the silhouettes and the details, and there's this for a long time it took us in CG to kind of figure out what to focus on, because we got things working smooth, and then we thought, well, it doesn't have life, so then what we were doing is for a long time we were focusing on dumb little things like fingers and eye twitches and all the details at the extreme periphery of the animation and of the performance. We thought, well, all these little things at the outer edges of the performance were what we were missing, and really what was happening is our core wasn't as pushed as we thought it could be. It wasn't as holistic as we thought it could be. So in this instance, what we have is a starting pose and an ending pose, and this breakdown kind of builds a bridge between the two of them, and it's pushed quite a bit. I may, you could make a case for something like this where you're not dealing with the two underneath poses. Maybe you do something that's got a little bit more of a line to it. Now, if you have a rig that has extra deformation controllers, now would be the time to use them. Don't build it with them, plus it with them. Okay, so here with this, I'm going to get rid of these keys on this because I don't really want keys on his root. Let's see, if I turn his deformation controllers on, now what I'm dealing with is I can kind of sculpt this shape a little bit more, depending on the rig, to varying degrees of success or whatever. And so you can really, this is where you can really push that silhouette and have some fun with it and stuff like that. And that's really kind of the whole, the plus and the minus of it. And if we had it like his little extra head controls on, we can do little things like this, or maybe we can drag his head that way, or we can anticipate it this way. So stuff like that, where this is where you can really hone in the shape even more, and you can really just kind of create this bridge that is easier to kind of build. But again, I don't like building out um, the core function of this breakdown of this A to B kind of shape concept. I don't like doing that with these high deformation controls on rigs because um, it's real easy to lose the volume and stuff starts looking pretty, pretty weird, pretty fast. Even with the structure of this pose in there, it's a struggle to make it feel connected, and so I'm hesitant to kind of do much more with it. Um, Gotta find his little. There we go. Nope, not that. That. Well, I could sit here and noodle it all day, but I think you kind of get the idea. Um, and how you build that shape. There's a lot of different ways to do it. See, that's why you use the deformation controls, and then if you do something that's higher up in the hierarchy, you're really messing things up. So I just generally stay away from those until I'm really, really, really down into the polish stage. Even for blocking, I don't mess with those things too much, um, just because they can get you in trouble a lot faster than they can help you. Especially in the early blocking stage. Try and make your higher end or your more base controllers do the job for you as much as possible. And if you have a rig that allows you to kind of push things a little bit more, again, save that for your polishing stage. But the concept here, where was I? Well, my hand was here, and my head was here, and my hips were here. Where am I going? Well, I'm kind of going up here. And so even if you just kind of made this simple, I was kind of here, and I'm going kind of up here. Okay, so the shape that I want to draw is going to have some sense of combination to all of that. All right, if I just kind of say that's the general overall shape of it, and you see, boom, he kind of fills that. You see that? And there's ways we can push it some more, and we can definitely have some fun with it, and we can fill it out some more. And the more deformable your character is, when you polish it out, sure, that's nice, but you don't need it. You could do this with blocks. I mean, he's all skinned and everything, but he doesn't need to be skinned. You can do him in his low res mode, and it still holds up because we're using the core controls of the character to create this simple A to B and right now sort of snapshot. And it's so powerful. And the thing is, when you do this, you can make this stuff move really, really fast. Like a move from here to here, if you use a typical kind of realistic approach to animation, you really can't make that big of a move that fast. It's pretty tough to pull off. So you're going to end up doing it anywhere from 8 to 12 frames. Okay, with all the little eases and the subtle things and making sure all that stuff works okay. Whereas with this particular approach, I can make this happen pretty fast. Like if I wanted to, I can make this move happen in probably 4, maybe 5 frames, half the time. But it will work and it won't feel jarring because that shape will fill in the difference. What we're leaving out in frames or what we're leaving out in increments of time fidelity, we're filling with shape. Okay? And really, when you think about it, let's stop and think about this. Isn't that really what motion blur is doing? Let's get back to our original concept here, where we have shutter speed. Okay? If your shutter is slow, is your motion blur bigger or smaller? Well, of course. If your shutter speed is slow, you end up with a big blur. All right? What's it doing? Slower shutter speed means it's taking a longer slice of time. It's using less frames, as it were. If you were to measure time in frames, it's using less of them, and as a result, it's filling in that motion with this shape of where it was, where it is, where it's going, sort of thing. If your shutter speed is fast, then you end up with just the shape. And that's why high-speed photography is how you capture sports, so there's no blur. You get these really cool, and that's how they do like analyzing bullets in flight and stuff. Super high-speed photography, super fast shutter speeds and stuff like that. With that, you get no motion blur. You don't need shape. So the more frames you're able to use, the less this concept works. Okay? And that's something to keep in mind. If you're working at 24 frames per second or 30 frames per second and you make a new drawing and your animation is very typical new drawing every frame, this methodology of animation may be jarring because you'll have smooth filled in, smooth increments, and then this big wham shape thing. It's not saying it's wrong, but you have to understand how to use it. It's like it's like using chili pepper in a recipe. You've got all these cool, smooth flavors, and then you got this spicy kick. Okay, well, you kind of have to understand how to play the flavors together, all right? That's a little food analogy as to how to be a master animator. You're always trying to measure how to use these various techniques for impact. In this instance, I got this really smooth stuff, but I really want to make this pop. Well, use this technique, but if you want to make something snap, you got to have the boldness to do it, and understand that if I'm going to use this approach, I can't really use this approach on a longer motion. This is kind of embracing the limited frame rate idea. So with this, I could take this and sort of spread the whole thing out. So if I just do stop it. Let's say I do something like this. I can even the thing is, you can make this asymmetrical, which is really kind of cool. So I got a pose and a pose. This is all just linear, okay? And that's not too shabby, but you notice how it kind of fills in pretty good. The hand does a little weird thing because it's I'm pretty sure that there is some kind of Euler filter thing going on there because I wasn't really careful with how my rotations were working. So let's see if my Euler filter will work. Come on. There we go. Kind of keeps it from caving in on itself. Alright. So what I can do is very easily build out the eases to this. I'll go here, set a key, but move it over 1. And maybe even move it over 2. And this is kind of like Dover Boys stuff right here, where a couple of frames are just really not moving very far. I can even set another key there and move it over. So I'm building super slow ease, and then it nails that shape and then comes up into this pretty hard. Now I would have to do something here to kind of smooth that out. I mean, that's just junky computer stuff. What I could do is set a key and kind of hold this breakdown shape a little bit, but I don't like it. I don't like holding on the breakdown shape because it's like it froze in that weird moment, so it creates a hitch in the movement. So if you're going to do this, hit that shape, but hit it at the highest speed of the motion. Okay, because it's the point where it's moving the fastest. It's where the motion blur of the image is the biggest. Okay, so hit that at the highest speed, and if you're going to come up here, kind of come up, maybe ease into your other pose a little bit more. So you kind of eases out slowly here, and I'm just kind of nudging it towards the previous one, so it's very, very slow ease out right there. And then he moves a little bit more, and then he hits this really fast, and it comes up into this. Now this is where if I was going to take the time to build that overshoot and settle back, I wouldn't ease into this here, but I would hit it really hard, maybe even in 1 frame, which is kind of crazy, but you can get away with it. Okay, but if I hit it in 1 frame, I'm going to want to hit it and then settle it back. So if I want to settle it back, what I'll do is take these and just kind of collapse in on himself a little bit, kind of give it a little bit of weight, and then get this foot down a little, so that you end up hitting it and settling back. Okay. me try and find that guy right there. Something like that. So you can go from this and hit that really hard in just one frame if you hit that and settle it back. Now the settle back is on one frame. What I end up doing there is I would key that, but then nudge it over a frame. And this 2-frame settle back, I wouldn't take a linear settle back. I wouldn't hit that and then come back in 2 frames. I would hit it and come back most of the way in one frame and then ease back into it on another. So a cheap, easy way to do that is if you hit there and you settle back, take that settle back and move it out a couple of frames, and then go somewhere where you're still moving, like a frame just short of it, and then take the two of them together, kind of tuck them back in. So what you get is he hits it and his settle back is like a 2-frame settle back, but he's doing most of the business on one. Okay. And how hard you hit that, I'm really rushing through this hit and settle back thing, and I don't want to get too distracted with it. I really just want to show you how important it is to hit this thing and just really nail it. Now the one thing about this, there's a little bit of a pop from here to here. So what you can do is you can break this up a little bit. You can start to cheat things up there a little bit so that this hand is getting on its way, and you can kind of drag it some and build extra. This is where the extra keys come in. Because it's starting to kind of get that idea there. So here we can kind of nudge it up a little bit. It can kind of start to kind of come out at it a little. And see how that one is starting to lead the motion and then come up there? That's where your eases are going to help you out. So your structure for building this is very similar to what I've been teaching for a number of years now. You build your poses. Okay. And then that breakdown is really going to be all about that shape. Alright, and then your eases, or your secondary breakdowns, or whatever you want to call them, those help you get into and out of these things in a way that kind of keeps it interesting, kind of breaks it up a little bit. But these right here, these are your bedrock choices. And those are the things that are really important. And if they're working, the specifics of how you get into and out of it, you've got room to play with. You can kind of nudge a little bit here, do a little bit there, cheat this move in that way, but really rely on these core ideas. Your pose, that big breakdown that builds that beautiful shape that shows you where you're going, where you were, where you are, where you're going. And you notice I'm doing this and I'm not using these deformation tools. I'm not using any special smearing tools, which I have access to. I'm just not using them for this because I want to show you that it's not really that necessary. And even right here, what we can do is break this up even more, is on this shape here, we can almost leave that hand sort of locked where it was, maybe even bring it back here. So then what we're really doing now is we're really connecting the past to the future through the moment of the present, all in this one drawing. And you can push this even more. But you see, it totally works. And we're hitting that pretty hard. Whether again I would stick with that, or whether I would kind of build kind of an ease right here, which is kind of my preference at this moment. Didn't like the overshoot and settle back idea, but building an ease right there really just helps a bunch. That right there, that's Dover Boys. That's that short film that Chuck Jones did in 1940, I think, 1942 maybe. Can't remember which year it was. I'm not a historian. I just like the stuff. But I mentioned it in the last video where a couple of and if you did any studying of it, you'll notice there's a couple of frames in the move, that just big swishy move. There's a frame or two where the character's kind of just starting to pull away, but the trailing edge of the character stays, and then the leading edge where he's moving, like if I'm going to move from this direction that way, then the leading edge is going to be this one. It starts to stretch away, but the trailing edge kind of stays, doesn't trail as much. And it does that for a couple of drawings, and then there's this big smeary drawing, and then what happens is the coming into this, the leading edge kind of gets most of the way there, but the trailing edge is kind of behind, and then there's a frame or two where it's like that. That's really kind of what we're building right here. The leading edge is pulling away by that hand, kind of pulling away first, but this one's staying behind and the head's staying behind. We're kind of, and you can play with this principle. When you understand what you're doing, you can take these other frames and really kind of make them do your job for you. So in this instance, we can even take the head and leave it up there, although he's kind of losing his volume. So what we need to do is maybe something like this. Okay, so that the leading edge, his hips are pulling away, this hand is pulling away, this knee is popping over maybe a little bit more. And what we're doing is we're using these basic simple controllers on this character to create the shape where this leading edge pulls away on these eases and this trailing edge kind of stays put on the eases. See that? That's really important to understand. And then that big one right there in the middle is where all the edges just go. Okay? You're not hanging on to the past. You're not grabbing the future yet. You're just jumping and creating that shape bridge. And then what happens as you ease in here, what I could do is, and what probably should do, is build some of this. Where this is, no, that's not, there it is. We can build some of this business in there. Alright, so you can do something like that, where these breakdowns, these secondary breakdowns now keep kind of pushing that idea. And that's really where the secondary breakdowns help you the most, is that kind of leading edge kind of holds, and then the trailing edge kind of snaps up in there. Alright, so when you're starting the move, the leading edge stretches away while the trailing edge kind of maintains its position. Then that big shape in the middle, the big breakdown shape, and you're just like, blah. All right, you're trying to create a nice clean shape from A to B through C. And then the easing into that pose, the leading edge is kind of there and the trailing edge is kind of smearing, and then it kind of squishes up in there together. Okay, so it's a very, very powerful way of animating, and it totally connects things. And again, you can get away with a lot fewer frames when you do it that way. So anyways, that's what I got for this one, and we'll kind of pick up the concept a little bit more next time. Hopefully this helped fill in the blanks, helped you understand a little bit of the application of how you can take these things I'm talking about in abstract and see them applied.